It's still very abrupt when the theme song cuts off, but nonetheless, we're here. It is week 14. Welcome back, world, to Roto-World's DFS Building Block Show. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined by friend in life, Hayden Winks. Hayden, did week 13 treat you?
Week 13 was really interesting. I had a couple good showdown lineups, and I really want to talk about last night's game because going into the game, there was so much uncertainty at a bunch of positions, and you kind of had to take a stand on which team you thought was going to win. We knew both defenses were going to be pretty good. So the one thing I want to talk about real quick, and we can get into this Sunday's slate, is talking about leaving money on the table. Because in the Millie Maker last night on DraftKings for the showdown slate, there was two lineups that were exactly the same except one player difference. So they had Cam Akers in the captain. They had Jared Goff, Cooper Kupp, Rams defense, Damiere Byrd. So it was a five Rams guys, one Patriots player. The team that won also had Jacoby Myers. Those two people won $550,000. They split it first place. There was 118 people that tied for third. This difference between the two lineups was the teams that finished in third had Robert Woods. The teams that finished tied for first dropped down to Jacoby Myers. So they spent less money. They gave up some projection, but they handled the variance correctly. They handled the duplications correctly. And the difference between the guys that made that switch, they won $550,000. The teams that tied for third won $1,639. So if a single one of those people that tied for third would have made that flip, they would have won like hundreds of thousands of dollars more. So leaving money on the table, the teams that won left $5,400 on the table. So don't be afraid to leave a ton of money on the table in these showdown slates.
That, and of course, make sure you always tell yourself the story. The story might not be correct. For instance, I didn't have Cam Akers, and I rostered two receivers with Jared Goff, thinking the Patriots would win, because I also bet the Patriots last night, so don't bet the Patriots either against the Rams. And it would be negative game script for the Rams. Not the case. Told the wrong story in my single entries. No big deal. Happens all the time. Don't mind that part. But yeah, tell yourself the story, and then, of course, watch how much salary you have. That's something very similar to what I saw in a few NBA bubble showdowns during the playoffs, in that rather than rostering LeBron James at captain, someone would roster Anthony Davis instead, and the same exact lineup, except it saved money. Thus, it was more unique to put Anthony Davis in the captain. And it's just options like that, little tweaks that make the difference in winning showdowns or not.
Yeah, I think so. Something I've been doing is I set a maximum. I am not going to spend more than $48,000 on these showdown slates. So leave at least $2,000 on the table, no matter what. And then from there, if you just look at your lineup and say, okay, I have the second wide receiver on the team. Instead of doing the second receiver, I'm just going to drop down to the third receiver, and I'm going to take some projection off of my lineup, but I'm not going to be duplicated. So I think that anywhere from leaving $2,500 down to $6,000, $7,000 on the table is more than fine. And actually, there's somebody that came in 119th place. He was the only person in Showdown to have this lineup, and he was 4 yards short of solo shipping the DK thing. And he went down even further from Jacoby Myers down to N'Keal Harry. So he went down another receiver down the list, and he was five yards short from winning $1 million.
Interesting. So those are some important takeaways for showdowns. You can use that for the rest of the year as well, probably next year too. But as you know, we are here to build lineups for week 14 and discuss the overall slate. And remember, we will continue to take your questions throughout the show as we discuss everything about this slate. And it's an interesting one that I'm looking forward to talking about because I like too much on it. I haven't been able to dwindle down my player pool at all. I like so many different offenses and stacks. We have 3 implied team totals: the Packers, Seahawks, and Titans, all on the main slate with over 30 points, according to Vegas. The Chiefs and the Bucks have risen throughout the week as well, so I can imagine they will be close, if not over 30 as well by Sunday morning. So there's just a lot of exposure here, and I'm not sure exactly what to do, which is why I'm looking forward to talking about it. And with that, let's go ahead and get started, Hayden, on your decision point for the week. Of course, the one conundrum you've been running into when building lineups throughout this week.
Well, Daigle, you nailed it. I have written down Packers, Seahawks, Titans over 30 points for my decision point, because you have running backs that have a path to upside. You have clear-cut receivers, and then you also have some tight ends that you can mix in. So trying to figure out how you can get a piece of each one of those games and lineups, which ones to full-blown stacks, which ones to get leverage off of. I think that's the biggest thing, because all of those players are underpriced relative to their ceilings, and you have to pay up for some of them, like Devontae Adams or Derrick Henry, but they're still probably some of the best values, even with their crazy price tags, just because we know the offense is going to go nuts.
So it's the cheap options I've been struggling with in these games, because if you try to stack these games or even skinny stack your double stack, in opposite, let's say something as simple as, I don't want full exposure to the Texans game that I do sneakily think goes over. Thus, I want Brandon Cooks and David Montgomery. Those are still middle of the tier prices and still fairly expensive. There aren't really cheap options there. I guess you could go Kiki QT or maybe take a chance on Chad Hansen. But overall, then, if you want to bring it back with, or not bring it back, but then add Russ, Lockett, Metcalf to that, and then bring it back with Perryman or Jamison Crowder if he plays, or Braxton Berrios if Jamison Crowder doesn't play, it's still fairly hard to shove all these guys in there. And I think that's been my biggest issue this week, is that I do want exposure to all of them, and I'm just not sure the ancillary options I should target. Maybe even like Valdez-Scantling comes into play this week, because we know he at least has the ceiling. It only comes, of course, like 15% of the time, but we know he has a ceiling.
Yeah, and I think with all three of these teams, Packers, Seahawks, Titans, the second receiver projects for like probably 3, 4, 5 points worse than the top one. And for the Packers, that would be like Aaron Jones instead of a receiver. But maybe you take the second priced guy as like the one-off play. If you're stacking, like, for example, the Seahawks, you would go Russell and DK Metcalf, but then you go Corey Davis to get exposure for the Titans one. So you don't have to pay up for the AJ Browns or Derrick Henry, but you get the mid-price guy out of that, because it's going to be hard to like not get one of these guys in all of your lineups, like, or at least try to do it, because they all project just so well.
Yeah, I think leverage will be important this week, as in if you fade a passing game, let's say like Seattle, running it back with Chris Carson instead to try to get the touchdown equity, since Seattle does have the second highest implied team total. And we really can't imagine them failing altogether, even though they just did against the Giants. So maybe we should. But given the Titans team total, yeah, I think it's still, not the Titans, the Seahawks. I think their offense is still pretty safe. And that goes for a ton of offenses here. The Vikings, the Bucks, the Titans, the Jaguars, I actually think are pretty safe as well. So just trying to get exposure to all of them. The ancillary options are what I usually like to attack. When the Bucks played the Chiefs a couple of weeks ago, that's what led me to Brady Gronk stacks with one of the receivers sprinkled in, because those are the options, the secondary guys in high team totals that usually get overlooked. Your Sammy Watkins, your even Hardman's if Tyreek Hill is out, players like that. So for sure, trying to get those ducks in a row, I think, will be important, which also leads me to my decision point, and that is the running backs here, because I usually have a dwindled down player pool I'm fairly confident in. I don't know what to do here. I genuinely don't. And we even had Tyler start us out on the show, JT Week. He's one of my favorite plays on the board. But then you look at all these other options we have to choose from, and again, we only get 3 spots really if you even use your flex there. But Aaron Jones, Montgomery, Carson, who we already talked about. I love DeAndre Swift as he's active. Mike Davis, Ronald Jones, Myles Gaskin, J.D. McKissick if you want to pay down as well. Like, those are all viable tournament plays. And not only that, but terrific plays to gain leverage off the passing game. So I just genuinely don't know how to limit the pool here.
Yeah, it's really tough. I think the Aaron Jones, Derrick Henrys are like the best plays at running back, but there's like 10 to 12 running backs I think are certainly in play for tournaments, all across the board, all at different price points. I think your point about if you're going to use, like, let's say you're going to stack the Packers, but you still want exposure to the Titans and the Seahawks, grabbing the running backs, because that limits if you pick like Tyler Lockett, that means that like now you want Tyler Lockett to go off and not Russell Wilson to go beat your own quarterback. So getting the running back, so at least you're not double dipping with the other correlation. So I think that was a pretty good point. I'll probably use this week.
Yeah. it's just going to be tough. Hopefully we can sort this out as we continue on. I'll pull up the DFS toolkit so we can go ahead and build a lineup together. Keep those questions coming in, and we will start with you for who your highest exposure is for tournaments this week.
So I think it's going to be Derrick Henry, and I keep going back and forth with this. Like, I want to play a lot of Devontae Adams, but I think the one difference with Derrick Henry is you're not losing opportunity costs at the other running backs. Like we said, like, there's a lot of like decent options, but none of them are like so stand out that I think that Derrick Henry, like you're clogging up one of those running back spots. And I'm not that nervous that there's like another stud running back that's just going to blow me out of the water if I fade him. And I think that I like Derrick Henry the best in the spot, just coming off of his worst week of the year. He's probably a little better rested after getting a monster workload for like 12 straight weeks. He's trying to win the rushing title. The implied team total is good. The matchup's good. I mean, there's nothing bad about this spot for Derrick Henry at all.
So whatever his name is, he mentions Dalvin Cook. And of course, Dalvin Cook and Henry are the two most expensive running backs on the slate since Christian McCaffrey has pretty much been ruled out. And that's the thing. Dalvin Cook's floor is safe. Again, we're not going for floor here. Alexander Madison ruled out, has not practiced since he went under the knife for that appendectomy. And Cook last week, career high 32 carries, career high 38 touches without Madison. I would expect the same again. But it's a entirely different matchup here. Bucks front seven, of course, limiting opposing running backs to 3 yards per carry, have allowed the league's fewest yards to opposing running backs by over 150. So even though Dalvin Cook gets the touches, I can see game script getting out of hand. In that case, we can go to Jefferson, Irv Smith, Adam Thielen, wherever you want to go to, instead of Dalvin Cook as leverage, even double stacking Kirk Cousins, honestly.
Yeah, the Bucks are leading the league in neutral pass rate on defense. A lot of teams are just kind of abandoning the run because their run defense is so good. I mean, the other thing with Dalvin Cook, he's at 9,400. So like for him to like bury you with a fade, he has to go like really nuts, because even like 20, 25 points from Dalvin Cook at this price tag, you can still win a DFS tournament without him in your lineup.
Totally. And especially because I mentioned all the players I think we have available to us at running back. That's why I really don't mind getting off him. Having said that, I will say for like, let's say cash games, his floor is higher than Derrick Henry's, because not only will they concertedly give him as many touches as Derrick Henry, if not more, but also he's being used in the passing game now as well. So his floor is definitely higher. Yeah. Having said that, I don't mind getting off of him. My highest exposure is JT week. Not only because it's a reasonable salary, of course, he's out-touched Nyheim Hines the past 2 games. Jonathan Taylor has that they played together, 42-18, being used more inside the 10-yard line, still catching passes, and it's a team total I bet earlier in the week. Once Silva texted me and said, hey, get on this Colts team total. It's one that continues to rise. We're getting Anthony Costanzo back, it looks like, because he practiced on Thursday and Friday. So I just think they will bulldoze, given what we know about the Raiders front seven, how it has struggled to defend opposing running backs. I think the Colts and Jonathan Taylor will bulldoze the Raiders. And so again, at this salary that really didn't even increase from last week, despite the number of touches he's receiving among that backfield, I think Taylor's one of the best plays in tournaments yet again this week.
Yeah, he's like your classic boom bust RB2 in season long leagues and a great tournament play, just because like we saw with Cam Akers, these rookie running backs all of a sudden just bang, they get the full workload and then you're off and running. And then like Cam Akers will probably be like $75,000 for the rest of the year. And if you were playing him last night in Showdown, you got a little bit of a price discount, because these rookie running backs, all of a sudden they get the full workload and then it's off and running. So I like the JT call.
Do you have a take on Kevin Schmo's question, Ezekiel Elliott or David Montgomery? Is there one like you lean heavily towards? Because although I don't really like Zeke a lot, I will say, given his salary, given the matchup, we know he's going to play despite being questionable. He isn't the worst tournament option still. He's actually probably a pretty good tournament option.
Yeah, he's fine. I lean David Montgomery just like straight points. I'd have to like think about if there's any like leverage off of this, any reason to not go David Montgomery. But I think David Montgomery is getting the same amount of work as Ezekiel Elliott, but I think he's getting maybe a little more pass game work, and his matchup I think is actually probably easier. I think the Texans' run defense is even worse than the Bengals' defense right now. So I mean, they're very similar plays. I think in my like the season long rankings that we do, I think I have them like basically back to back, and then like that RB8 to RB11 range. So I mean, they're very similar plays.
And what I think is a unique way, you have ownership projections in your end. So if you could just tell me, like, what do you have as the top three? Let's say exclude Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry. Who are the other three highest owned running backs per the ownership projections?
Well, I don't think Dalvin Cook's going to be nearly as high ownership as Derrick Henry. I think it's going to be Derrick Henry. You have like your Aaron Joneses, James Robinson, Austin Eckler. Then you're getting your Dalvin Cook, Chris Carson. So I think those are the top ones. I think it's going to be mostly Derrick Henry and maybe Eckler and Aaron Jones.
That's interesting. I expected David Montgomery to be high up there. If so, like I'll gladly pound the table for Montgomery over Zeke.
There's like this mental thing where people can't pay that David Montgomery price tag just because they're so used to him failing over and over again. So I think there is a little bit of a mental block that people can't get over. To
be fair, that was me last week, but also David Montgomery came in at the second highest ownership, I believe, among running backs. That's why I got off of him, because we talked about it last week. We had Jonathan Taylor. We had a few other options in that middle tier that I was totally fine coming off him. But now if you're telling me in arguably a better matchup, in a game I like the total going over, I can get Montgomery and then still bring it back with Brandon Cooks or QT. Buster Screen, of course, the Bears slot corner is out. That's a matchup I like a whole lot then.
Yeah, I don't think David Montgomery's ownership is going to be high enough where you have to like worry about it getting out of hand.
What about your large entry tournament dart for this slate?
Man, I have a bunch written down here. If we want to get really ugly, I am all about Braxton Berrios down. I think he's minimum priced, and he's going to walk in. This is assuming that, and I'm leaning Braxton Berrios here over Jeff Smith because Sam Darnold just loves targeting his slot receivers, and I think Berrios is probably a better player than Jeff Smith overall. On top of that, and the reason why you like Braxton Berrios is he's the easiest bring back in the world on the Seattle stacks. You're actually going to afford the Seattle stacks if you use Braxton Berrios, and on top of that, Braxton Berrios' ownership is probably going to be under 5%. And I think Brashad Perriman, if Crowder's out, is probably going to sneak up to like 15+%. So you're getting a lot of leverage off of Brashad Perriman. And I mean, Braxton Berrios is going to get enough targets to get there at his price tag. It's just a matter if he's going to score a touchdown or not to go nuts.
Yeah, to be clear, Sam, of course, if Crowder plays, you're not playing Berrios. They play the same exact position. But Crowder was downgraded, DMP, because he injured himself in practice on Thursday, DMP Friday, now questionable, but looking more unlikely. So if that is the case, Berrios, I still love Perriman. I love Perriman this week. And if Crowder plays, I think I would play Perriman. But now if Crowder's out, the ownership would likely flock to Perriman, making Berrios, who has shown rapport now with Sam Darnold in 2 games with him, the better play in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Berrios is a pretty solid play.
Your list. Let's talk about him.
Okay. I think these are more like middle price guys now. I'll start from the bottom. I think Sammy Watkins. I'm the biggest Sammy Watkins truther there ever was, but I mean he's leverage off of Tyreek Hill. He's leverage off of Travis Kelce to a certain degree. If you're using double stacks, I like using Patrick Mahomes with either one of those high price guys dropping down to Sammy Watkins because it's pretty hard to fit in these double stacks if you're using all of the top Chiefs guys. And I think that Sammy Watkins, everyone loves to hate on him, and he always is injured. His floor is non-existent. But the dude does have like 35 DraftKings point ceilings occasionally. Even earlier on in the year, he was getting peppered with targets. And I think that they trust him a lot more than McCole Harmon and Demarcus Robinson right now. So I think that Sammy Watkins is interesting. The other receivers, do you have a take?
Yeah, we'll just talk about all of them. Okay. I will say a couple weeks ago in that Bucks game, like those were my ancillary options. It was Brady, Evans, Gronk, Watkins, Tyreek Hill. So I double stacked the Chiefs without having Mahomes, knowing their league high pass rate, which is sustained now for 5 straight games. And so I think that you can definitely play those guys, even if you want to do Watkins and Kelce, totally possible. I wouldn't play Kelce and Hill together with Mahomes, well, unless you are double stacking with Mahomes, or maybe if you're not double stacking as unique exposure, if only because they are going to come in as they always do, 25+%, which if we're trying to, by rule of thumb, only have a tournament lineup that totals 115 to 125% ownership, like that already takes away any like unique leverage you have on your lineup. So, so maybe play them together without Mahomes. Otherwise, I think Kelce and Watkins or Hill and Watkins is definitely the way to go.
It's just hard to fit in Mahomes, Kelsey, and Tyreek. Tyreek Hill's price tag's way up. Travis Kelsey's price tag's way up. And Mahomes is always highly priced. And Sammy Watkins, Daigle. I mean, everyone hates Sammy Watkins. He's going to come in at like 3%, 5% owned. So I think that he's a good spot.
I will say the opportunity cost for Hill over Kelsey is completely different because Kelsey in fantasy points, he's the 5th wide receiver. You go down, Darren Waller isn't a good spot admittedly, but you can't, like, there's no one that competes with Kelsey weekly. So just if you have enough salary, it's super tough, obviously. But if you have enough to get up to Kelsey, like, you win that position. Whereas all of us are still talking about Kyle Rudolph and Anthony Firkser and all these cheap guys that never hit anyways. Like, it doesn't matter whatsoever. So Kelsey, if you can get up to him in what is, again, an amazing spot, then yeah, it's a great position.
Yeah, if I was going to build a Chiefs stack, it would be Mahomes, Kelsey, Sammy Watkins. The next 2 receivers are Marvin Jones and DJ Chark, and they're kind of in the same spot where they're perfect run back options in those game stacks. They're the deep targets over the middle. They're the first read on a lot of these plays. So I think that both of them, their price tags are right in the sweet spot where you can definitely get these guys in the game stacks. I think that those are going to be priorities. Especially, I think DJ Chark's a good one because you're also getting a little bit of leverage off of James Robinson if DJ Chark goes nuts. And I think that James Robinson always comes in around like 15, 20%. So I think that you're getting a decent discount with DJ Chark. And I think one of the best stats of the week, Daigle, is the one that you brought up with Glenn. And he's like leading the league in deep targets right now in his last couple starts. So DJ Chark is that guy.
I actually have DJ Chark written down because he's my favorite one-off large entry tournament piece. I'll still probably end up playing Derrick Henry or Corey Davis, honestly, but I think DJ Chark's a play no matter what for me. Of course, 44 or 48 routes run on Glenna's dropbacks last week, so it wasn't the injury he was coming back from. He was on the field more than any of their other receivers. Colin Johnson, as Corey noticed, I will say, Colin Johnson's only in play if Laviska Shenault goes out. Colin Johnson was still the 4th most used receiver behind Chris Conley and Laviska, and only came on the field last week whenever Shenault got injured and got sidelined. So it is still DJ Chark's. I think people will be scared to play him since he really didn't hit it all. He got a couple catches in the 4th quarter. I think he finished with 6.6 points because I did have him rostered in my Minnesota bringbacks. But I think it's another terrific spot where I'm playing him no matter what, and he's good for skinny stacks as well, like I mentioned, with Henry, A.J. Brown, whichever way you want to go. So I love DJ Chark this week.
All right, throw him in. Yeah, put him in for sure. All right, and while you're doing that, the last one I want to talk about is Mike Davis. And they got just what's your read on what do you think Mike Davis's ownership's kind of come in? Because
it's not going to be anything
really low.
That's why I mentioned him at the beginning of the show. I think he's great leverage off Robbie Anderson, who will come in really high owned now that we have DJ Moore ruled out. Curtis Samuel will probably collect some ownership too. But Mike Davis off a bye week, I would expect he's good for 20 plus touches and touchdown equity.
Yep, and that's exactly right. He's going to be at an 1/8 of the ownership of Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel. And with DJ Moore out, that just probably means that, I mean, Mike Davis probably gets an extra target because of that as well, and more goal line equity. And I mean, everything's pointing in the direction of Mike Davis. He was getting all the usage that you could ever want. And I think the bye week, like you said, is pretty important for him to get a little healthier.
Joe Banks asks, like, if Kelsey's in such a good position, do you think you could start your build with him? I would be interested in throwing him in there and then seeing what can happen around him. Again, the issue is finding value in this slate. That's why I think Braxton Berrios opens up, even Brashad Perryman opens up a whole lot. But around that, I'm really struggling. Maybe Michael Pittman, maybe Nelson Aguilar, maybe T.Y. Hilton even. But yeah, it's really hard to find value, in my opinion, in this slate unless you attack the ancillary options. And of course, like if you're not playing Kelsey, that means you are probably paying down for Irv Smith if he plays without Kyle Rudolph, unless you can think of some other tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, I just like stacking my tight ends with my quarterback. There's never like a spot where I'm like, okay, I just need to get in, make sure I have this guy. Just
Cole Kmet isn't bad either this week, honestly.
Cole Kmet would be my cheapest guy that if I was like looking for somebody and the rest of my lineup was built and I needed to find somebody to be Cole Kmet.
I will say that if Irv Smith does catch a lot of ownership, where's Irv Smith? I thought he was 3,100. Maybe he's not. Let's see here. Irv is he might still be marked on the back end. Okay. We'll not worry about it. I think he's 3,100.
He is 3,100.
Okay, cool. 3,100. If that's the case, then Cole Kmet would be my favorite pivot at 2,900. The past 2 games, it has not been Jimmy Graham. They have passed the torch. And as we talk about weekly on this show, you should not follow the tight end. Usually there's one cheapy tight end, maybe a couple that collects all the ownership everyone surrounds themselves with. Just don't follow that guy. Last week was fine, or at least I say it was fine. I did it anyways because I had Ryan Tannehill at 7%. Ryan Tannehill was projected to come in under 8%. I wanted the double stack. That happened with Corey Davis and Anthony Ferguson. But even so, Anthony Ferguson only got there with 5 catches in the fourth quarter. Like, he was pretty much useless until garbage time. So just don't worry about tight ends. Then if Irv Smith comes in, you just go Cole Kmet. That's totally fine. All right, I'm going to optimize this really quick then, as we talked about all those. I'm glad we were on the same page. I'm actually going to build
nice. Going back to that Kelsey thing, I think one unique way to, if you're like hell bent on getting Kelsey in your lineup, I think that using the Dolphin stack is pretty unique, because you're getting the leverage, or you're getting if Kelsey goes off, that means Tua and Devontae Parker are going to have to push the pace. And I think another one, I think you said this on the podcast talking about Miami's tempo last week and how it went way up. And I looked at my charts, and the Dolphins are also, I think, number 2 in neutral pass rate over the last month as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. So if Kelsey goes off, or if Mahomes goes off, or any of them, I think that the Dolphins pass catchers are a pretty good spot too.
Yeah. So to be clear, for those who didn't listen to the Roto Football podcast, what I mentioned was that Tua was more effective. They moved the ball in the second half because they went to no huddle. That's why he had a season high 39 pass attempts. And then Flores said on Monday, they're going to come back out and do that because Tua looked so much better and more comfortable from it. And if that's the case, we are afforded more plays for the Chiefs. It doesn't matter that the Dolphins have a good secondary. It's Patrick Mahomes. Whether they blitz, whether they play zone, Patrick Mahomes is either first or second in passer rating against those 2 defenses. So especially if like Patrick Mahomes and a double stack, even if it involves Sammy Watkins, is going to come in under roster, like, I love that. And then, of course, we see 2 lineups here with Mike Gesicki. I don't mind that at all. Tua is actually preferred as tight ends in the red zone as opposed to Devontae Parker, who Fitzpatrick favored. So, yeah, I mean, I absolutely love that. And then, of course, Kirk Cousins double stacks I'm all over as well. Even more so than Lions Packers or Seahawks Jets. My favorite game is the Bucks and Vikings. I don't know how that game fails. I think both offenses are as safe as they come. On one end of the ball, this Tampa Bay secondary has been beat up for 5 games in a row now. They've become a pass funnel before everyone's eyes. And the last time we saw them for a bye, of course, Mahomes pelted them for 460 and 3 touchdowns. Kirk Cousins has done nothing but average 8.6 yards per attempt since week 6. He's been over 300 yards with 3 touchdowns in 3 consecutive games now. Would have been 4 had he not had 298 yards, woes him, in the game prior to that. He's just been great. And if they're going to run the ball and it's going to be ineffective, which they will open the game doing against the Bucks, then of course they're going to have to turn to Cousins for 3 quarters. So I love both sides here.
Yeah, but I'm always going to have a lot of Justin Jefferson. He's just such a stud, and I'm totally fine with Kirk Cousins. We've talked about this narrative before, Daigle. Tom Brady, when he plays in these night games, maybe he didn't get enough beauty rest. I'm thinking over the bye week, Tom Brady probably got a lot of hours of sleep, so he's probably going to cash in like 14 days straight of like a really good night's sleep and walk right into this for like 350 passing yards.
It's another ancillary option game as well, because you can go Gronk. Like we've seen it before. You can go Brady Gronk, and Gronk, of course, has the capability of matching Kelsey. He did the last time they played each other 2 weeks ago. Evans will probably still come in under rostered, even though he's the clear go-to option in the red zone and around Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown. I don't mind sprinkling on Antonio Brown, who I still think will pop at least for 1 game at some point. But honestly, if you just want to go Evans Gronk, that's okay too. Vikings have nothing. I mean, Eric Kendricks has already been ruled out, PFF's number 6 linebacker out of 173 qualifiers on the year. Yannick Ngakoue leads the team with sacks, and he was traded in week 6. Like, they literally can offer no pushback against Brady, and we know Brady has been terrific when not under pressure this year. So, again, that whole game environment, I want so many pieces from it.
And a lot of those guys are going to be relatively under-owned. They're not going to catch the ownership of the top 3 games that we keep talking about.
Let's ask a couple questions here from Kevin. So how owned do you think J.D. McKissic will be? Do you have a lean on that, since he is probably the cheapest running back? with a high floor. I probably still won't play him. Maybe he's optimal for cash games because of his receiving floor, but for tournaments, I will probably be looking elsewhere.
I'm not going to play him. Like where JD McKissick wins is like on these underneath routes, and the 49ers have the fastest linebackers. I mean, we're talking about ballers at linebacker. Like JD McKissick can't make plays on his own, and now he's in a really tough spot. So that game can get really slow too. We've seen the 49ers play really slow. So I don't want to be dealing with JD McKissick. I think ownership wise, probably like average, like 10%, somewhere around there. I don't want to mess with it.
And then Sam asked, Jefferson and Thielen positively correlated. So I've seen this twice now this year, because in any tournaments I'm in, I always scroll to the top at the end, just try to figure out where I got my process wrong, what the winning lineup did correctly. And last week in like the mid to high stakes, there was a winning lineup, Two Guns, who actually works for Fade the Noise. He had a lineup with Mike Glennon, DJ Shark, because remember, we talked about last week, you could take chances at quarterback because the big dogs weren't in the slate. So you could go all the way down. I did not have the courage to go all the way down to Glennon, but winning lineups did. That's fine. But Glennon, DJ Shark, and then he correlated or negatively correlated Dalvin Cook and Adam Thielen. And that's the second time I've seen two Vikings players without Kirk Cousins this year. So I think you can absolutely do that. You can go Jefferson and Thielen. You can just go the two ceiling guys, Cook, Thielen, Cook, Jefferson, without Kirk Cousins, because we know they're pretty safe in this environment.
Yeah, I think they are probably slightly positively correlated, just because you need the Vikings to like get into this pass heavy game script for them to like really reach a ceiling. So I think they're probably slightly positively correlated. I think one of my biggest offseason pieces, I'm going to do like a series where like looking at how often a second receiver hits if a receiver scores 30 DraftKings points, how often his running back scores like 25 DraftKings points, how often the tight end does, the other quarterback, and look at correlation at the top percentiles. Because I think when we're looking at correlation just in general, we don't care about median correlation. We need like, if a player hits his 98th percentile outcome, who's correlated at that spot? And I don't think that we've fully answered that yet.
That's fair. Also, this question, who would be your run back in a Justin Herbert stack? And without Julio Jones now, I think there's only one player, and that's Calvin Ridley. Just no one else has the ceiling to get you there. We've seen Hayden Hurst, Russell Gage, all these guys just eliminated when Julio Jones is not on the field, whereas Calvin Ridley, even at a lower rate, but he still keeps sustaining. I was actually happy to see him ruled out, because this eliminated this game, in my opinion. Could be very wrong here, of course, but like this eliminated the game entirely, from my opinion, because I don't think Ryan and the Falcons can hold their own without Julio Jones. And there's always concern, even though it's still probably a good spot, there's always concern in a Justin Herbert stack that Anthony Lynn will just crater the offense. Could get Justin Jackson back as well with Kalen Ballage and Austin Eckler. So I'm eliminating this game personally as a whole, and if that's a mistake, well, it was me.
I think Justin Herbert is a good stylistic fit against the Falcons. Play a lot of like cover one man defense that they can get beat deep, and we've seen Justin Herbert uncork some deep passes. So I think it would either be Ridley or Hayden Hurst, just because you're at least knocking out the tight end spot. And Hayden Hurst's usage is a little higher when Julio or Calvin Ridley are out of the lineup. So yeah, I'm not sure. This isn't a game that I'm going to be prioritizing, but I think that it's definitely the Herbert side rather than the Matt Ryan side now.
And I think it's Herbert, Eckler, Allen. Like I would not be like Keenan Allen's raw targets are still there. He still averaged 11 per game the past 2 weeks with Austin Eckler. I understand the target share has dipped 8%, but the raw targets, like as long as they're still there, double-digit targets, you're never going to complain about that. So I think it's fine. Although, like I said, there are now enough concerns around this game for me to personally get off of it, especially in like single entry formats. Do you have? Well, let's just go into game stacks here then. Let's just talk about a lot of games here. What is your favorite unique game stack or game stack overall?
So I think just the basic game stack would be like Ryan Tannehill, pick one of the top two receivers, and then get Jonnu Smith in there. Jonnu Smith should be fully ready to go. I think he practiced in full today, and you're knocking out with the tight end spot with him. He has multiple touchdown in his range of outcomes, and I think Corey Davis is underpriced, certainly. I think that A.J. Brown is a great play because we've seen the upside. You're getting a little leverage off of Derrick Henry. So I think that the Titans game stack, you can use both receivers. I just think that trying to get your tight end in there as well is always a decent option.
Yeah, like I said, Tannehill 7% rostered in mid stakes last week, and it's going to be even less this week because there are a number of other guys who people value more. Russ, Mahomes, all these other players at his position. So I think Titans double stack is great. It's still the second or third highest total on the entire slate. Again, the Titans offer no pushback. That's like, it's a week you could also go Glennon if these other, in my opinion, if these other big guys like weren't in there. Like Glenn is not going to match Mahomes, Russ. That's the only concern here. He will save you salary, of course, but I like the game environment overall for that one everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the Jaguars are missing their top 3 corners, and they play a lot of man coverage defense, and you can't play man coverage defense if you don't have first-round corners out there.
What is the number or the roster percentage you have for Russell Wilson? Because that's the one I thought I could maybe be sneaky with, but I'm starting to think that it's what everyone's going to do. And if that's the case, that is my number one fade this week.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you. I was wondering when we were getting to top fades, but I
think I actually skipped it. So let's get here. Russell Wilson is my number one fade. If the public come in on him, and like I can usually gauge public, not just looking at roster percentages on Friday and Saturday, but you see all the write-ups, like the DFS write-ups around the industry, and like the same cover image over and over again, and you just say, "Oh, that's the guy I'm fading this week." Okay, I guess I can't play the Seahawks.
Yeah, the Seattle stack's going to be one of the top 3 stacks for sure. I can just and my top fade was going to be DK Metcalf, the 3rd highest priced receiver. Of course, I mean, like, we're not arguing that Russell Wilson to DK Metcalf is a bad play. It's just like the leverage that you get off of them. If I was going to stack the Seattle game, it would be with Tyler Lockett instead of DK Metcalf. You're getting a big ownership discount. Nobody wants to play Tyler Lockett right now, and I get it. He hasn't done anything. He might even be hurt. But I think that Chris Carson and Tyler Lockett are the better plays in the Seattle side rather than paying the full price tag on DK Metcalf with all of the ownership. So unfortunately, it'll be fading DK Metcalf this week.
I do feel like Seattle won't fail in that they won't get there. So one-offing, like you said, Lockett and Carson are my favorite pieces in that game. One-offing them in skinny stacks is important. Having said that, if everyone's going to double stack, I'm going to avoid it because just in Pete Carroll insisting that he's going to give Carson his full workload tells me the game will be slowed down. They're going to run the ball more. They'll probably be ineffective doing it because the Jets, for all of their flaws, of course, still top 7 in fantasy points allowed to running backs, still have a sturdy front 7. And if everyone's going to roster the Seahawks double stack, like they can still get there as long as we go Kirk Cousins, Tom Brady, Ryan Tannehill, and they get there on 5 to 10% less ownership. That's the whole point. Russ can score 35, but if Cousins scores 33 to 35, we're good. It doesn't even matter what Russ does. And I think there are enough high totals, enough terrific positions on offense to just avoid Seattle.
Yeah, and I think just straight up, I would rather play Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams over DK Metcalf. Just like the usage is a little bit different between those guys, and so if I'm going to pay up, I would rather just spend all the way up and go to Devontae Adams, who's just like the best play on the board.
Okay, and then my favorite stacks this week. I mean, I got a lot here, but Cousins, of course, double stack as leverage off Cook, and I think the game environment's terrific against the Bucs. I would probably, I'm gonna probably have a lot of Ronald Jones this week now that Eric Kendricks is out. Mike Evans, like I said, I still think is one of the best plays with Brady. But if I'm trying to get touchdown equity still, I think there's enough reason to go to Ronald Jones without Eric Kendricks because I think he can just run crazily. It's going to come down to, of course, if Bruce Arians gives him 20-plus touches, and that may not be the case, but that's why he's like a volatile ceiling player. Because if he does get the touches, it's a terrific spot where they can just lean on him. So I still like Ronald Jones quite a bit here, bringing it back with Cousins. Deshaun Watson double stack, I think, is interesting, bringing him back with David Montgomery. Then again, that's also, I wrote that down when I thought Montgomery would be top 3 in ownership. It doesn't sound like that's going to happen. So I may just have Montgomery anywhere, anyhow, because he's a terrific play this week. And then if you're telling me Mahomes is going to come in under rostered with Sammy Watkins and Travis Kelce, I will 100% do that because you can do Myles Gaskin, bring it back. You can do Hill and Watkins, then bring it back with Gesicki if you choose to do so. And, of course, you can do Devontae Parker. So I think the Chiefs are super interesting as well, especially if everyone's overlooking them.
Yeah, I don't think it's that they're underlooked. I mean, Patrick Mahomes would be a top 3 owned quarterback, I think. I just like the Sammy Watkins call out of it all because, I mean, he's just going to be so low owned. And, I mean, you can, if McCole Hardman's your guy or Demarcus Robinson's your guy, feel free to go that route as well. I just think that paying up for Hill, Kelsey, and Mahomes, like you're really like, you have to really find a ceiling game from all 3 of them because their price tag is so crazy right now.
Okay, so I think it seemed like it moved pretty efficiently. I think we've hit on everything, though.
I have another stack that I want to talk about. I think going down to Marquez Valdes-Scantling and the Packers stacks is probably the way I would do it if you're going to double stack Rodgers. MVS's price tag's down, and he has no floor, of course, but he's the guy that gets the targets that are 35 yards downfield. And if Aaron Rodgers is going to hit this price tag, he needs one of these big plays, and I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling is the guy to do that. So Devontae Adams, I would be running it back or adding the second player with MVS. I think Robert Tonyan is also a good play, but I would rather go MVS rather than Alan Lazard, who's costs more, just because you're getting the really big ceiling game out of MVS that speeds up the entire game. So that's how I would use the package.
I'm on a 100% mini stack DeAndre Swift and Valdes-Scantling if DeAndre Swift gets the go ahead, because I think that's how you can get good exposure to that game. I love DeAndre Swift this week, man.
Yeah, we need like a good report to come out to make sure that DeAndre Swift isn't going to be limited coming off of this like illness and this weirdness, whatever's going on with him right now. So, but his ownership is going to be very low because of that.
Another thing I will say for Deshaun Watson, that why I'm on it is because David Johnson going to the COVID list means Duke Johnson's back under center. Remember, he was getting limited touches anyways. They pass more, just like we saw on Thanksgiving. They throw Duke Johnson out wide and just lean on Deshaun Watson more. So I think it's actually going to be pass heavier for the Texans, and I don't really worry about the matchup with Deshaun Watson. He got there against the Colts, even though the Colts defense still was successful. So yeah, I like that a lot too. There's a lot to circle around, but I think we covered enough cheap options. That's really all I wanted to accomplish, because there's so many other good stacks and plays to get on that I didn't know where value was, but I like where we finished at.
Yep, and I'm going to go through the injury report. We're getting the West Coast injuries coming in. I'll have all the blurbs up on Roto-World. I'll have more notes in my fantasy blueprint column if you're into that. And yeah, go listen to our recap shows, like an hour and a half show, but it was a good one.
So with that being said, Hayden, tell them what else they can find that you've done throughout this week, and then we'll go ahead and get out of here.
Yeah, blueprints. The rest of it's going to be posted tonight, and I'm on Twitter at Hayden Winks.
I'm on Twitter at NotJDaigle, and then of course we will be back, like Hayden said, on Sunday morning. All of these, that's a good summary by Transitionum. Everyone gets there this week. That's a good wrap up, honestly. Get it right, because everyone gets there. It's the perfect MMA week, honestly. We'll be back, all these channels, Sunday morning, an hour before kickoff, answering those start-sit questions that I ignored purposely. So tune in then, because we will have more information then. And then hopefully we dwindle down these player pools by the time we come around to it. So until next week, week 15, we will see you then.